One of the things that we really want to celebrate at Birtenshaw, particularly over the last couple of years with the pandemic, is that if we think back, and most people probably don't want to, but if we think back to March 2020, when the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson said all education services, all schools are going to close, most people didn't hear the bit he said after that, and that was except provision for children with special education needs and disability. And what that in effect meant was that all of our education services had to stay open, our schools and our college. So we had to ask, or expect really, because it was mandated by government, we had to expect that all of our education staff came into work and continued to provide those services. Lots of other people were furloughed, lots of other people lost their jobs, lots of other people didn't have to go into work, but our staff had to come into work, and they did so willingly, and they worked all the way through the pandemic. And yeah, at times they were tired, at times they were feeling, when's this ever going to end, as most people in the country did. But they survived that. Not only did they survive, they thrived, and they ensured that every child continued to have access to a service, was continued to be supported, and was able to grow and thrive and grow through that. And the result of that is that as we come into 2022, when effectively most people were thinking that the pandemic was over, I mean, there were elements of it that still affected our care shares, elements of it that affected some parts of national life, but by and large, as we come into 2022, it was more or less over, and schools were starting to go back to normal. One of the things that is a huge achievement for our teachers, our education staff, is that because we'd stayed open through the pandemic, none of the children were behind where they should have been. If you look at lots of other schools throughout the country, it's almost like nearly every child in the country has lost something through the pandemic. They're behind where they should be on their key stages or their milestones. Not one single child within Birtenshaw was behind where they should be, thanks to the teams, the education teams. And that's reflected in, I think, by Ofsted inspection. So there was a recent Ofsted inspection at Birtenshaw School, Bolton. Bear in mind, the challenges that everybody had faced through the pandemic. And still, in a sense, we're still facing, because we still got, staff has still got to take time off if they test positive for COVID. So there's times where, the school's, it's still operating, but it doesn't have the same number of staff that ideally it should have. But there was a recent Ofsted inspection, and there was not one single recommendation or requirement as a result of that inspection. It's what's called an ungraded inspection, so they don't change your judgment. Still classed as a good school, but the inspector said, you're really outstanding now, but I can't tell you that because this is an ungraded inspection. But to come out of that, the inspection regime, if you like, with nothing but praise. And the inspectors were incredibly positive. The report's incredibly positive. There's no recommendations. There's no requirements. That shows you how good the school is. And if that had been at any point in history, we would have all been really pleased. But it's on the back of 2 years, 3 years of a pandemic. For me, that's incredible. And it's down to the phenomenal team within the school. Another thing I want to celebrate within Birtenshaw, in the past year, we relocated the enrichment service. The enrichment service is for young adults with special education needs and disability. Many of those young adults have autism, and one of the things that people with autism often struggle with is any kind of change to the routine, any kind of change to where they go, the things that they do. We bought a new building earlier this year, renovated it specifically for the enrichment service, and then spent 3 months, the enrichment team spent 3 months preparing the young adults to move to the enrichment service. We kind of anticipated that it would be very rocky, if you like, if I can use that phrase, not very stable for a number of months. But because of the preparation work that the team did, it was just like done. The young people moved, they finished in one building one day. The next day they came back to enrichment. They were in a brand new building that had been completely renovated for their service. And it was as if nothing had happened. So it was almost as if all of that, the well-known information about people with autism struggling with change or a change in routines, it was almost as if that didn't happen. And that's not because it was an accident, it was because of the brilliant preparation that members of the enrichment team did. They worked so hard to prepare every single one of those young adults for that move, that when it happened, not one of them found it traumatic, not one of them found it stressful, and in fact they all flourished when they moved into the bigger bespoke service, the space in that service.